Hello, everyone, and welcome to CARNET Insights on Future Mobility. Today's topic is circular economy in the automotive industry. This will be an exciting discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. I'd like to welcome our speakers. Joining us online is Abhishek Gupta from the World Economic Forum. To my left here is Kristin Fondahl from the VolksWagen Group Innovation, and then we have Dr Francesc Pardo from UPC joining us. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. So we'd like to open up with the concept of circular economy. Prior to that, I would like to introduce a little bit more about the guests, just a little bit of a bio, if you don't mind. Abhishek, so you're part of the World Economic Forum, and you're currently based in Geneva, which is where you're calling, I assume? Where you're calling from? Very good. So Abhishek is leading the Circular Car Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder program across the automobility ecosystem, which is propelling the circular manufacturing and business models. The role he has is to steer automotive circularity and focused on industry pilot projects. And prior to that, Abhishek has worked for Accenture for 10 years in the growth and strategy division. Welcome again. Kristin studied biomedics and mechanical engineering, and she's specializing in the field of robotics and mechatronics, and working at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, Robotic Innovation Center. Currently she's with the VolksWagen Group Innovation, and after taking some time off in the sabbatical to do some sailing, she is now refocused. The focus is now on the Go.Sub-Zero in the VolksWagen Group Innovation. And this is an interesting initiative. It's related to carbon negative and circular mobility, which fits in with some of our themes. And last but not least, Francesc Pardo. So you're from civil engineering and a faculty member of the Department of Project and Construction Engineering at UBC, where you're a lecturer professor. You arrived there from ESADE Business School, and well over 10 years of experience in different research projects, where some topics concerning infrastructure, sustainable development, circular economy, and smart cities were done. As well, you were a visiting research fellow at UC Berkeley. Very interesting. Thank you very much for coming. I think now I'd like to open up a little bit about circular economy in general, that we're all on the same page of sort of what is the guiding theme of this event here. More or less, the circular economy is a model of production and consumption. It involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products. We're trying to sort of get the product life extended as much as possible, take on the role of reducing waste and increasing material efficiency. Beyond that, which is the official European Union sort of definition here, circular economy is part of a greater societal transition that we're a part of now, and we'll continue to see more development in this space, not just in the automotive industry, but across different industries, and very fascinating movement that we would like to maybe root down in a discussion with the automotive sector to make it connected with this event. As part of a historical development of the circular economy, it should be noted that it's an idea that has evolved over different sustainability concepts over time. And within the context of this with the automotive industry, it's fascinating to note that the automotive sector is actually built on the concept of material efficiency. It grew with concepts ranging from just-in-time manufacturing and lean methodology. So this idea of increasing efficiency in the circular economy is nothing new. We're now just forced to look beyond our own supply chain and to the industry level. And this is where this conversation will maybe help push that conversation a little forward. I think that if we can slowly progress to our set of questions, if you are all ready, I'll start with Abhishek first. Our first question is You can, of course, introduce yourself, fill in any gaps that I have left in your bio. And maybe the first question would be, how is your work related to the circular economy, and what circular economy represents for you as a concept in general?
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I think I think you captured the bio very well. But okay, I hear the echo again. I don't know if that's. Can you check the audio settings?
Yeah, we'll get on that with the audio team.
Okay.
Apologies for that.
No worries. So yes, Abhishek this side. So I'm part of the World Economic Forum. I lead this project which is called Circular Cars Initiative, based here at Geneva. And I've been leading this project for almost 9 months now. Do you still hear me?
Yeah. Loud and clear. Have we lost you, Abhishek?
I think I lost the audio.
Can you see me?
I think I lost the audio in between.
We can hear you just fine.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the project which I lead is called Circular Cars Initiative. And since you asked that, how is my work related to circular economy, it is, everything about circular economy, right? So this is an initiative which we co-lead together with World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, and together with Systemic, Accenture, and McKinsey. In a very simple terms, our vision is to really align the automotive sector towards circular economy principles. So the way vehicles are manufactured, they are used, and they are disposed of, including the components in them. So we are really looking at, the life cycle emissions of the vehicles, because if you see the industry's focus is just on right now, like, okay, you put EVs on road and you curtail the tailpipe emissions, but what about how you're putting the steel, the batteries in the car, how you're getting the raw material for that, how you're charging the vehicles, and what do you do with the end of life, and that's the issue we are tackling. And so we are working very closely with the automotive OEMs, the automotive suppliers, and including upstream, like the metal companies, the steel, the chemical, the polymers, and some of the downstream companies as well. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you. Maybe if we go to Kristin next. So the question again is, fill in any gaps, introduce yourself, and how is your work related to circular economy?
Yeah, thank you. I think you've basically what Abhishek said, you already introduced me quite well. I'm working at VolksWagen in the group innovation, so we're working for basically all the Volkswagen brands before pre-development on innovation topics. And my personal, or not just personal, but my field of action, or the field of action that I'm leading, is Go.Sub-Zero, which is coordinating all the sustainability topics in the group innovation. So both in the direction of decarbonization, carbon economy, carbon negativity, which is the main title, Go.Sub-Zero. But also, and that's the main focus right now, on circular economy and these topics around circularity, and how do we set up the automotive industry in a way that allows for a circularity, which is touching not just on how do we do that technically, but also on how do we do that economically, and how do we have to change our business model in that regard. So we're also working on circular car concepts, and how do we need to build the vehicle differently, but also trying to look at like the whole surrounding of the topic circular economy. It's not called, it's called economy for a reason, so that has to cover all aspects.
Yeah, great point. Dr. Francesc, can you continue with the line of questioning?
Let me start saying that this is a great pleasure to be here, so thank you very much for inviting me, because it's a great opportunity for discussing with these experts. I am the local one, so I have an extra pressure on my back. I have been and I am very interested in cities and sustainable development, and this is the reason why during the last 5-6 years I have been working and collaborating with different European cities, trying to help them on the transition from linear and traditional cities to smart, sustainable, and circular ones. And we are doing through a tool, a strategic tool that we have called a business model city, where we are trying to understand how they are using their resources in order to create public value for their citizens, trying to minimize the environmental impact and making the whole ecosystem viable. And this is a very important thing. We are trying to create ecosystems where each stakeholder involved in the value chain is capable to create a value downstream of the value chain that at the end will arrive to the final user, which is in our case the citizens. But an important thing here is that we are trying to be sure that these stakeholders, and particularly the local ones, the SMEs, are capable to capture part of this value. Because if we are not sure that they are capturing part of the value, the ecosystem won't be sustainable in the long term, and our circular economy approach won't survive in a long-term approach. And I think that this is also very important.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I can maybe summarize some of the answers we heard and try to establish how this conversation will go forward. I think that Abhishek spoke about expanding the scope within the supply chain and looking at the beyond your own operations and more the upstream as well, and getting that more of a holistic picture. And Kristin, you spoke about this need to have the economic side established as well, which is crucial to sort of drive the transition to circular economy forward. And I think that this makes a lot of sense of aligning some of these profitability, but then the execution as well. And also, Francesc, you spoke about this, the environment context and as the city environment, which after all, cars are used within that environment. Those are the stakeholders that need to be incorporated into that discussion. Very well. So I think if we can continue on with the questioning, this time, Kristin, if you don't mind, I will start with you. Sure. Would you say that the concept of carbon neutral, the idea of sustainability and resource efficiency, these concepts, can they always work together? Are they compatible and in a balanced way? And how could these three ideas maybe shape future mobility?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, they don't go together automatically. And that's why I also divided into like the decarbonization topics, the topics that, or the innovations that are directly directed at climate change avoidance, basically saving carbon emissions, and circular economy and resource efficiency on the other end. I think resource efficiency and decarbonization usually go together quite well, because resource efficiency leads to lightweight, leads to less energy used for our industry, for cars, to transport the car. But circular economy also means I need to find ways to make use of the materials and of the parts and products that I'm producing after the end of life. And here, resource efficiency and lightweighting often clash with the circular economy aims, because if you have, for example, like the standard example for this is functional integration and composite materials like carbon fiber, reinforced plastics. Those are super for decarbonization. They're very lightweight. You can really well integrate them in the car, but they're a nightmare to recycle at the end of life. So we have to make sure, if we really want to be sustainable in every sense of the word, that we both have both goals in mind when we're developing the products from the beginning, so we don't run into that trap of just optimizing for that one goal, the climate change and decarbonization targets, which of course we have to meet, and of course we have to find ways to prevent this climate catastrophe that we're running into right now as humanity. But if we do that by destroying all our ecosystems and biodiversity and mining new materials, we're just running from one catastrophe towards the other. So we really have to make sure to target both at the same time. And this is really like a multi-factor optimization there.
Yeah, definitely. Francesc, would you like to add anything to this?
I would say the first thing that, for me, sustainable development or sustainability is the ultimate goal. So decarbonization and resource efficiency could be understood as pathways to achieve this goal. So we have to balance both of them in order to arrive to this sustainable development. I am completely agree with my colleague, but I think that there are some barriers that we have to overcome in that sense. And the first one is the business model that we are in place. We understand the car, the industry. The car is a product, and we want that product, and we should change this approach, understanding the mobility as a service. But this is not easy because the whole industry is optimized for understanding the industry as a product. The whole value chain is trying to reduce the sales price, and doing that is difficult to introduce the circularity in the ecosystem. Another important barrier is the cultural one. Cars, vehicles are an aspirational purchase. We want a car because it's a symbol of a status. It offers us independence. It offers us flexibility. And we have to understand that maybe we are in a moment that we need to improve this approach. And another important thing here is that we should be prepared for optimizing everything in the production. We don't need cars with a maximum speed of 240 kilometers if we are allowed to go 120 kilometers per hour. So that is something that we have to think about, and then maybe we will be ready for shaping the model.
Excellent points there. Yeah, there's a lot of a shift that need to happen both with the consumer and also the broader concept as you outlined. Abhishek, would you like to comment on this question in terms of carbon neutral sustainability and resource efficiency? Do they always harmonize and work well together?
Yeah. No, I think my fellow panelist already made some great points. But what I would like to say is that if we look 3 years back, 4 years back, we were thinking more, about circular economy from the perspective of climate change, decarbonization, right? Now, if you see with COVID, with geopolitical tensions, and massive pressure on supply chains, what you see is that circular economy becomes a driver for your resource efficiency and value creation as well. So to give an example, right? In today's world, a company has a right strategy to secure the end of life of, say, battery or a component, and they use the nickel, the cobalt, the lithium from that, and recycle them in a proper manner and feed them back in their supply chain, then they become much more resilient and like kind of a circular economy generating value for you, securing supply chains for you. And that's where the carbonization part and the resource efficiency part already come together in a very well efficient value generating manner, because we should not forget that ultimately businesses have made huge pledges, but they can only get there if they have the right scalable value from these solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a vital point you touched upon, and I'll summarize sort of this question starting with that one, is this alignment in the supply chain and looking at the resilience aspect that is associated with the transition to a circular system there. And I think this is something that will get more and more discussion and going forward. As you mentioned, impact of COVID on the supply chain has been tough in many industries. And we heard Francesc speak about the need for the consumer to also evolve the mindset of what is offered in terms of the product and looking at these different service models, which could be the way forward. But of course, this is a challenge that we'll need to establish forward. And Kristin, you spoke about this sort of the need to balance the carbon neutral aspect and decarbonization and the resource efficiency. And I think we can sort of agree that there's been evolution in the discussion towards the circular economy, and that it's more and more, as we discussed over there by the table, that resource efficiency is now coming to the forefront as something that is a challenge, and hopefully more discussion will be around this area as well. I think that we'll move forward now and look at the third question here. Francesc, I think I'll start with you, if you don't mind. So is decarbonization the first sort of achievement for the automotive sector in order to move forward with the circular economy? Is this the first step that maybe, or perhaps it's a step that's already here? What do you think?
If we want to limit the global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees, I would say absolutely yes. But the question here is not why, but maybe is how. Right now, if I'm not wrong, road mobility represents around 20% of the total emissions, and 70% of these 20% are generated by the exhaust pipe emissions. So it seems that the answer should be focused on electrification in order to eliminate this kind of emissions. But the question is, are we ready to electrify our fleet? Right now, worldwide, electric vehicles represent just 1% of the total vehicles that are moving in our roads. Europe has just 2% of the vehicles electric. So we need maybe to understand that we have to create another target before arriving to a total electric fleet. And for that reason, I think that one approach could be to renovate the car fleet that we have right now. Spain, for example, has the oldest car fleet in Europe. Our fleet is 13 years old, which is very old, and it represents a very important emissions in our atmosphere. So I think that we have to work in internal combustion engine vehicles in order to make them much more efficient, in order to decarbonize our mobility.
Thank you very much. Abhishek, we'll go to you next, if you don't mind. What's your take on the sort of decarbonization as the first step in the context of this circular car concept? Maybe we can speak on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would say decarbonization definitely is the first step, but it is not the end of picture. Yeah. So like, of course, you need to have low carbon production, low carbon material getting into the vehicles. But ultimately, if you look at the way circularity can be achieved in automotive, there are 2 or 3 other major areas as well to look at. One is the material level circularity, so like the polymers, the batteries. How do you create those closed loops, in which you can have a very predictable and a clean supply flow coming back? Yeah, and that's where industry players are struggling. Yeah, so cars in Europe end up in Africa. How do you get a predictable material circular loop going on? That's point one. Second is we also have to look at that, how lifetime optimization can be achieved for the vehicles, So vehicles which can be put in those kind of, business models, those kind of operating models in which the vehicles are used for a much longer period. And then the utilization improvement of vehicles. So like the vehicles which are parked for say 20 hours in a day in a parking or on the roadside, how can you more efficiently and profitably put them in those kind of business models where you increase the utilization of those vehicles? So I know there are a lot of those business models like ride hailing, subscription, peer-to-peer sharing, they're all gaining momentum. But a lot of these companies are struggling to make profits. And somebody has to crack this equation that how can you really make a profitable business model in which vehicles, the same fleet, like for example, Volkswagen, right? You're selling, 10, 11 million cars a year. How can you do that, in terms of just not the one-time sales, but really, how do you get into that as a service business model to improve the utilization of those fleet? And that is the holistic picture in which the circular economy can be achieved in automotive.
Very good, very good. Kristin, can we hear your take in sort of the same line of thinking?
Sure. Yeah, I think my colleagues already touched upon most of the vital points towards the mobility as a service topic and the higher utilization. Yes, that would be like per vehicle the dream solution to decarbonization, to just use the vehicles we have in the fleet already more and not just use them as parked vehicles for 95% of their time. But this really is a hard equation to crack because, as Francesc already pointed out, the vehicle is much more than a mobility device to a lot of people, a lot of users, a lot of customers. So actually shifting to 100% mobility as a service, we don't really see that happening from just the customer side, because I mean it's just convenient to be able to have my own space, my own vehicle in the city where I can leave my stuff and not worry about it, and not worry about where it is when I come back. So don't want to judge this here one way or another. It's just a lifestyle or usage style that we're so used to that it's really, really hard to break that habit for basically the whole society. So from our point of view, maybe an intermediary step can be something like vehicles as a service, where we lease out the vehicles on a longer term basis, and then still keep the control over the vehicles and still keep the responsibility for the vehicles, to keep them upgraded, to keep them refurbished and updated, and also up to date, because there we come with the old fleet into the space of where decarbonization and circular economy can come together. If we're able to upgrade our fleet also technologically, we can save a lot of carbon emissions on the one end, and also reuse the materials that we get back while we upgrade them from the parts that we exchange in our supply chain. So that would be the ideal model, that we just keep the responsibility for the cars at the OEMs, at the manufacturers, and have a carefree car for everyone that they can use however they want, either as mobility as a service or as their own vehicle, not really their own. So that's kind of the direction that we're looking into. And yeah, the old car fleet really is making the decarbonization really hard, which is why we are also at least partly looking into basically a carbon circular economy. So how can we get the carbon out of the air, fix it, and build either polymers or fuels from that, so that we can have carbon negative fuels that could also still power the combustion engines. That's not a really sexy topic, but it's something we really have to look at, because otherwise just the existing car fleet will make our climate goals really hard to achieve.
Thank you very much. And some interesting...
If I may just add a point.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, no, I was just saying that I think I fully agree with the VolksWagen view there. And I also feel that I think one of the struggle for the industry is really to identify those, hotspots across the supply chain where the emissions are happening. Right. So, the transparency across the life cycle of the vehicle and the components, right? So, for example, at the circular car side, we have developed, along with WBCSD, a common methodology in which, we can do the carbon transparency across the life cycle of a certain component, like a gearbox, yeah, and the steel which goes into it, the alloys which go into it, yeah, and I think that kind of transparency across the value chain is going to give more visibility, and B, really have the accountability, to the hotspots across the value chain.
Very good. That's an excellent point, and a good way to sort of wind down. And I can now summarize some of the ideas that we touched upon here. I'll start with yours, Abhishek, with this idea of creating a transparent view of the flow of materials and sort of a standardization of how this stuff is actually accounted for, not just the emissions, but any other metrics. And we actually heard also that the actual transition is a bit challenging in the context that in Europe we have a long way to go. So using the concept of decarbonization as the first and only step is definitely not the way to go, but this requires a change in mindset. And I think that overall we can summarize this discussion as one side facing the consumers and their changing needs, and also within the industry itself, and these flows that were mentioned that need to be solved. But nonetheless, a lot of innovative ideas are yet to come, and some being implemented already. At this point, I would like to hear maybe from the audience if you have any questions for our experts here. Feel free. We have a microphone in the back, so anyone raise your hand and speak your mind. We have someone in here.
Okay, I will start.
Thank you.
We said that in terms of barriers, we can find in the business model how to make profitable the services in mobility. But my question is regarding the materials. Which are the barriers that we can find in the recycling and the reuse of the materials used in cars?
Would you like to take that one?
I can try, although I'm not a material expert, just as a disclaimer. So I think for a lot of materials, especially for the battery materials that are under a lot of discussion right now, there are solutions to recycle them almost to 100%. I think the values are at 98%. That's the last thing I heard. So a lot of the materials can already be very well recycled. The problem right now is more on the material supply, because we are only just starting to set up this whole materials like circular economy or circular supply chains, and getting high value, especially polymers, like high quality polymers out of the recycling processes. Right now there's a very limited supply, which is pricey or expensive. And for the polymers, the processes like chemical recycling or catalytic enzymatic recycling that can really make new polymers from old polymers, whereas the recycling we do right now is degrading the material quality over time. So these new kinds of processes are only just being scaled industrially. So chemical recycling, I think the first big scale plant is supposed to go online in 2025. So for at the moment the supply of the recycled and secondary materials is really more the bottleneck, and of course for the metals, decarbonizing the whole value chain is a really large task, also needing big scale facilities that first simply need to be built, and that takes time. And also need decarbonized energy supply on top of that, which we all know is a whole different problem. So I think for most of the materials, we have technical solutions to recycle them, not for all, but for most. But yeah, the supply is really the problem. And for the recycling, electronics and electronic materials, and also the rare earth materials in the motors are another challenge, I would say. Not unsolvable, but not solved at scale right now.
If I can, I would like to add a couple of ideas. We in this transition, we need to redefine how we are designing our cars. Maybe this is the idea of the eco-design. From the very beginning, we have to think that some of the parts of the car, some of the components of that cars would be reused, repaired, and recycled. So, for example, if we make the products with modules, would be easier for the workshops to reuse these materials in another car. And here there is the second idea. We have to empower our workshops. We have to create hubs for them in order to get these materials to be used in when they have to repair, when they have to prepare new cars for being reused.
Very good. Abhishek, you want to add anything to the discussion with this?
I'm fully aligned. The only thing is, Kristin, she made the point, right? Like, I think the technology is there. You know, we can easily do material recycling for a lot of things. But the biggest challenge, and that's the same feedback we are getting from most of the OEM, is that, you know, they do not have visibility on the end of life of vehicles and components. So think about batteries, right? You know, the e-waste, which is going to pile up 10 years from now with the e-vehicles coming, right? And the cars ending up across the world, right? Now, there is no standard shared logistics mechanism in which this capacity can be pooled and that can be brought forward. Like, right now, the unit cost of transporting back the vehicle and the battery is so high that it is highly inefficient to do these solutions. And that's the biggest challenge right now.
And also, if I can add to that, we don't own those vehicles anymore.
Exactly.
So if we wanted to use the materials from the end-of-life vehicles that are piling up right now, we would have to buy them back, which of course then is a hard cut on the business model of recycling them at all. So that's why I was talking of the vehicle as a service, as a business model where we keep ownership of the cars and don't run into that problem of our cars go God knows where, and we have to find
blind
ways
spots,
to take them back. So, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and within my own sort of research, I also found this, something you mentioned is this, the conversation aspect of let's recycle some of these materials, and then the actual building of the infrastructure and the solutions. These move at different timescales. The conversation is something that can occur in a year. Building the infrastructure can take several years. So it's part of the reason why we're having this discussion now here, as in hopefully something generates as a result. And I think this two different time horizons are crucial of why materials are difficult to. This is aside from the fact that technology is ready, but the execution is a bit challenging. But definitely great points in context of increasing efficiency in the material area. Any other questions from the audience?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. What about remanufacturing? Because we are talking about the new production and whatever, but what happened with the overproduction or recycle, not just materials and components or whatever? The remanufacturing is very important in circular economy model. So.
Are you suggesting, would you like them to speak in what happened? Is it active? Is that the question?
What about this part? Is SEAT or this sector doing something about that?
Does anyone have any idea of, let's say, anything that comes to mind with terms of remanufacturing, any projects, anything that is on the radar?
Oh.
Go ahead.
you came from Volkswagen.
Yeah. So I guess that goes to me as well. Yeah. So the short answer is we're working on it. So a lot of OEMs have already shown concepts in that direction. BMW had a very prominent concept, circular eye vision concept of what a circular, I have to say, show car would look like. And on the other hand, some other OEMs, Renault and Toyota, are already ahead of everyone else right now on recycling, building up recycling factories and actually taking the recycling part for the end-of-life vehicles into their own hands for Renault and Daimler as well, really, actually. And Toyota is actually also offering refurbishment services for their vehicles. So we are also working on all kinds of projects in that direction, but so far, apart from using recycled materials in our new vehicles, which we're already doing right now, a lot of these are really just picking up speed and still are in public, so I'm not allowed to talk further on about that.
Classified. In terms of this discussion and that keeps sort of evolving forward, perhaps we'll see in the future some more interest in this area of remanufacturing. Any other questions that we got? We have one in the back there.
Yes. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for the presentation. My question, I think, goes more for Francesc. You mentioned something about how important is the fact that Spain is having one of the oldest fleet in Europe, and that this could be very problematic. I wanted to ask you, do you think it's more important to put the efforts in public policies in changing the whole fleet of a country or part of it, instead of changing people's mindset of using more sustainable ways of transportation? I know that Kristin said something about that it's impossible to get 100% of mass, but usually policies go towards one direction or the other. So I wanted to ask you which direction you think is more important.
I think that we have to work in both sides. You have to have a plan A and a plan B, and of course it's cheaper if you has the ability to change the mindset of the people. But right now it's difficult. There are some different companies working on mass mobility as a service, and they are getting very good results. But how many people is still working without trying this kind of services? So we have to introduce policies for doing that, and we will see in a short and in a mid-term if they are effective or not. And this is the reason why I think that the plan and the plan B could be also the renovation of our fleet. Here in Barcelona, for example, we have different companies in terms of motorbikes working on mass. Cultra is a success story about the company. SEAT is also working on mass as a service. So right now we should talk. Should share these experiences and try to involve as much people as possible on board.
Very good. I guess any other questions from the audience?
Yep.
One on this side.
Couple.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's any efforts on part of the regulator in terms of, for example, Dirección General de Tráfico, in order to upcycle or recycle this kind of vehicles? Because I heard about this great initiative, which was started but it wasn't even a startup, it was a group of people that they wanted to get all the Vespas or all, scooters and transform them and make them electrical. But then they will get stopped by a barrier of the Dirección General de Tráfico saying, no, that's not a vehicle that you can get out into the streets. I know that our country is very protectionist of the production of new vehicles and everything, but what about these efforts from the community that are not being supported in any way?
I suppose that the question is for me as a local one.
By all means.
I cannot provide you a precise answer in that sense. It's true that our regulation many times is not helping us on doing that, but it's also true that in 2020, in March 2020, the European Commission introduced a new action plan for empowering the citizens in order to try to help on this transition. But maybe that moment was not the right one, because I don't know if the day where this document was public was the exact day of the lockdown. So we have been working in other issues. Let me say a bit more important for that moment, and maybe now it's the right moment to restart on deregulate the regulation that we have in our country and also in our city.
If I can maybe add to that, because I think legislation and regulation policy making is a really, really big point, and I'm sure Abhishek will agree there. That is also pushing this topic also on an EU level with the Circular Economy Action Plan and revisions to the End-of-Life Vehicle Directive, which is pushing us as OEMs into this circular economy, which makes us start to think about our business model, which is where mobility as a service then comes in again, because implementing those changes in our current business model just costs us money as a company. So if we don't find ways to also leverage on the end-of-life vehicles and on the fleet vehicles and refurbish them, also under the supply chain pressure, geopolitical pressure we have right now on the supply chains, this is really pushing the whole industry into this direction. So I think legislation is, of course, in some points also hindering, and it's also cumbersome and bureaucratic, but from my point of view, it's really the driving factor in this whole circular economy initiative right now.
I think that there is another important issue.
Sorry.
There is a lack of standardization. We need standards. I guess for companies it's important to work with the same rules everywhere, because if you have to adapt your business model or your approach in Spain, then if you move to Italy, you have to change the approach. So it would be interesting to have standards for working with just one framework.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Abhishek.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that fully aligned here, and I think a lot of ground level issues are there when it comes to the regulatory and compliance issue. Even if you think about bringing the vehicles or the batteries back, like for example, batteries are classified under dangerous goods, so the cross-border movement or the cross-intercontinental movement of batteries is still so tricky, and that complicates the process. Even within European Union, if the shipment has to move from one country to another, it's a big hassle. So we, from the Circular Cars Initiative side, also have a dedicated track on the policy. So what we do is like talking to industry executives like VolksWagen, Umicore and others, BSF, we try and bring a consolidated view on, what should be the part of the policy action roadmap. So last year when we submitted our recommendations, it was very well received by European Union. This year also, we have heard that there is an upcoming regulation on the battery side. The trilogues have begun now, I believe, and we are going to shortly put a kind of an opinion piece from our side, bringing the voice of the industry again.
Very good. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, here.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for your very interesting insights. My question is also related to the regulatory framework, but well, let me summarize that here some interesting concepts have been mentioned. First, we have to save the planet. Secondly, that decarbonization is fundamental in the mobility industry. Then that companies are willing to do so, despite of that is not so economically feasible compared to doing nothing, right? And well, my question here would be, well, it has also been mentioned that we can measure somehow how are we on, to what extent companies are doing it well or not so well in terms of how are you internally doing with circular economy and recuperation and recycling of materials and your prime matters, right? So my question here would be, would it take sense to your eyes to set some kind of quality label in order to brand companies and say, this company is performing very well in terms of circular economy, this company is performing not so well, and rate them and assign, in terms of governmental policies, some kind of subsidies to companies to help them and to encourage them to be able to, let's say, adopt those kind of measures, or to, let's say, to brand or to label those products coming from those companies and give some subsidies to potential customers that are willing to purchase those articles compared to another ones that are not provided by a company which is, let's say, so good performing in circular economy. I don't know if those kind of initiatives are already being set or not, or perhaps you can tell some examples, or your opinion if this could take sense or not. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think this is a priority question probably for Abhishek as well, but those initiatives are already in picking up speed with the EU taxonomy. The problem here is really the transparency, and to sum it up, it's complicated to measure CO2, especially in or the carbon footprint, or also other sustainability measures, especially in a circular economy, because if you think about it, you want to assign like a carbon footprint to a product, but then you recycle the product and you don't know in the beginning how often you will recycle that or how often you will be able to recycle it. So in theory, you would have to divide the carbon footprint, the initial one, over the products that are still in the future to come, which is very hypothetical and very like putting a good standard in place for the life cycle assessment of products really is critical on the one hand, and I think there's no one in the industry and in politics who doesn't want that, but it's also really complicated to do in practice, to put into place. So a lot of smart people are working on that right now, but yeah.
Well, I'll not say, we are the smartest ones, but we get the feedback from industry executives. But no, absolutely, I am fully aligned with what Kristin is saying. I think the biggest challenge right now is about measuring, the emissions. And I think this is an excellent question which came from the audience. So it's very difficult to benchmark companies and their products in terms of the true carbon footprint per product, per business unit, or whatever, right? And that's where I think we are trying to take a very kind of a pilot project approach. So for example, just for steel, just for battery, just for polymers, can you do a life cycle assessment and identify and have that carbon transparency across the value chain, that this is how it should be measured, this is a common methodology, common denominator everybody should align to. So in fact, in one of our working group, we have 8 or 10 auto OEMs, the steel companies, some of the chemical companies coming together and helping us define that methodology first. And then we are going to further expand it, yeah. And I believe VolksWagen is also part of that. And it's one of the solutions which is together with WBCSD and called as Pathfinder. Yeah, so I think those kind of solutions are coming up, but they're under development. And I think the point on consumer labels is amazing as well. I think I haven't seen anything which is super successful in this industry, but I think this is a way to go definitely, you know, how to really motivate the end consumers to buy such products. I've also been made aware of certain studies like from ICCT, International, the Clean Transportation Group, and they're also trying to benchmark different auto OEMs and suppliers on their carbon footprint. But it's highly ambitious on how will they have the entire data, with such a big challenge in finding this information across the value chain of automotive.
Yeah, definitely. Anything to add, Francisco? Okay. Would like to kind of. Do we have more questions there? There was one on the left. Would you?
No. Now? Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Talking about the good practices, from which industry that has more development in this circular economy issue, the automotive industry can copy good practices, and I don't know. Good practices from which industry the automotive sector can copy these practices.
So should I?
Go ahead. Whoever wants to start. Yeah.
I would say that construction sector is doing quite interesting works. Also, the water management sector is also introducing interesting solutions. But each sector is a world for itself. So maybe it's difficult to introduce specific practices from very different sectors to the automobilistic industry. But I think that there are many different options where we can inspire ourselves in this industry.
Yeah, I would add, especially in the sectors that are already producing very high value products. So, for example, medical equipment is already refurbished and has a very well established circular cycle, just because these machines are so expensive that it makes every sense also economically to keep them running as long as possible. Same is true for example, Caterpillar, like these big working machines. Those already also are refurbished and repaired until it's really no longer possible. So I think those are some examples, some models that we can have a look at or are already, which is why I know them, having a look at for the automotive industry. How do they set up these services? What is needed also, because you need a whole new infrastructure. Francesc was touching on that earlier with the workshops and the new role of the workshops that we need if we want to really build up an automotive industry that keeps responsibilities for the cars over the lifetime. Then we need other infrastructure, new infrastructure than we have now. And that's something that we can learn from these kinds of industries that are right now already producing very high value products.
Abhishek, any inspiration from in other industries you can mention?
No, I'm fully aligned with the examples which have been given. I think another industries could be somewhere within the consumer space, and say, like the furniture and other industries. That's where also we have seen some of the big retailers doing it very nicely. Yeah, but I'm aligned.
Yeah. Also, I can add. I'm currently doing a research in regards to the pulp and paper industry. I come from Finland, and it's a big sector there. And what happened there in the sort of believe in 90s, early 2000s, there was a big change in consumer consumption patterns. Of course, paper is no longer as necessary. We're going digital, so the industry was forced to change the way that they look at efficiency in terms of its own processes. Factories are upgraded, energy consumption is controlled, and also the product. When you have something like a box that has a mandatory recycled content, then this is an interesting dynamic in the marketplace. If you were to have a car that has a mandatory recycled content put by the manufacturer, you suddenly have to control that downstream materials and get it back to your own factories. The question is, if your competitors will do this, that's a problem. So you have a competition about waste. So these are some lessons to be learned, not necessarily transferable to the automotive sector, but a question of competition in terms of waste materials. How are we going to solve that? If you have a great collaboration, is that perhaps not legal? These are questions that can be drawn from other industries that we can definitely learn from, if not implement. Yeah. All right. I think at this point we will wrap it up. We had a really great discussion. Of course, we could continue all night, but all good things must come to an end. So maybe some final closing words. Maybe I can start and we'll go this way. And if anything else you would like to add, from my side, I would like to say that this is an ongoing conversation. Again, I'll use the word societal transition because this is what it is all about. And you definitely witnessed here that the challenge of transitioning is it's a multifaceted challenge involving different stakeholders. Consumers do their part, and companies must do theirs. We'll move it on this way to Kristin. Any closing words you can kind of say?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for also to the audience for the really, really insightful and interesting questions. That's exactly the way, the right direction to think about this topic. And from my point of view, just maybe as a final remark, I'm really positive about and optimistic about the circular economy movement right now, because whereas even a year ago this topic was, as I said, more a side note on decarbonization, it's really, really picking up speed in all industries and especially in the automotive sector. And I really hope and cross my fingers that we can pull this off and really build a sustainable mobility ecosystem in the future that doesn't need new resources in, I don't know how many tons we use every year to churn out product after product after product, but rather really, really go more sustainable and reuse what we already have. So I'm optimistic, but it's still a long way to go, and it still needs also the collaboration from everyone at the table, including the users and customers of the mobility, to also shift their behavior a bit to be able to do that. So yeah.
It has been a great pleasure to be here. We are in the right path, but now it's time to materialize the smart ideas that we have around. And this is something, as Kristin has already said, that will be done if all of us are involved. So it's time to make an effort for materializing what we are talking about.
Okay, I think we might have lost Abhishek. Oh, there you go. Go ahead. Sorry, the screen changed.
Sorry.
Yeah, any
No,
closing
I'm
words?
still here. No, absolutely. So thank you so much for again. I think it's an excellent forum and lovely to talk to you all. And I would only say that, that circular economy in automotive is something which is going to define the competitive advantage going forward. It's no more just done for, sustainability or, considering purely the decarbonization goal. It is going to become much more CEO level conversation to become real competitive advantage for automotive companies going forward. Yeah, and that's a great news, because that's where we'll see the right investments in the right direction.
Yeah, very good point. I think with this in mind, we would like to close the event. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you very much to our speakers here. Very informative and great discussion. Yeah.
Thank you.